Today's show is sponsored by Ear Trumpet Labs. Ear Trumpet Labs make handmade microphones at their craft workshop in Portland, Oregon, and I'm recording on one of their microphones right now. I'm using a model that they call the Edwina. I've also been using the Edwina at most of my live shows, and everywhere I play, people talk about how wonderful the microphone looks and how great it sounds. I personally don't like the sound of a plugged-in guitar, and the Ear Trumpet Labs microphones have been a great solution for me to mic my guitar and my vocal all on the same microphone. I couldn't be more pleased with how they look, how they sound, how functional they are, and I'm really proud to have the folks at Ear Trumpet Labs sponsoring Cowboy Crossroads. You can find out more about them at eartrumpetlabs.com. I'd like to start today's show with a poem written by S. Omer Barker. This is from Barker's 1928 book, Buckaroo Ballads. It's entitled, Free Rider. Spurs for my heels, a pinto horse, and knee-rubbed saddle leather. A prairie trail for easy loping speed. Chaps for my legs, a rope to swing. What matter wealth or weather? These are the few things of my utter need. 10,000 branded cattle, dollars, walls that make a city, would clutter up the ranges of my soul. Spurs for my heels, a horse to ride. Oh, I am dumb with pity for those who make possession all their goal. Lone trails to ride, no household goods to fetter me at morning. And must you worry over what to buy? The wind is free. My wants for things have always died a-borning as I go riding under open sky. These few things serve: my spurs, my horse, my knee-worn saddle leather, an open trail. These are my covetings. What matter acres, houses, wealth? Old horse and I together are masters of our way, not slaves to things. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is Amy Hale Auker. Amy is a working cowboy, an author, and a poet. Ian Tyson has called her a gifted storyteller, and Dave Stamey says she's a writer with a capital W. I sat down with Amy in Alpine, Texas during the Texas Cowboy Poetry Gathering and recorded this interview. Here's Amy Hale Auker.
Both of my parents are educators, but I grew up in a livestock family. The men in my family were all livestock men. They raised children and made a living, especially my paternal grandfather through the Great Depression. He raised 5 children, raising goats and sheep and cattle, yes, but anything that grazed. He didn't have a big prejudice against what he was doing to make a living as a livestock man. And so my father, as an educated man who's also a teacher and has done a lot of different things, his number one love, though, was the livestock industry and was shoeing horses. I mean, he raised 4 children for a period of time there, making our whole living shoeing horses, even though we had a teaching degree. And so my father really influenced me not only to love the land and love the animals and to have a strong connection to West Texas and the land and the animals, but words. My grandfather wrote novels. I have them. I have my grandfather's novels. My dad has written poems and novels and essays, and none of them are published. And they taught me to love literature and words married to the land and the livestock. And that was an incredible thing. When I was a sophomore in high school, I took 2 math classes at the same time because I wanted to catch up with the Texas Advanced with Honors Degree program that was going on at that time. So I took Algebra 2 and geometry, and I really overloaded my boat. I think I was also taking chemistry that year, and I'm not a math and science person, I'm a word person, so I was really overloaded. But my English teacher saved me because she introduced us to some incredible poets like, I remember E.E. Cummings, because that was totally outside my realm of experience, and then Carlos Williams. And then I was really driven to my father's textbook anthologies that were on our shelves and seeking out poetry and language. It wasn't the poetry, it was the language for me. So much more than the way it was formatted or put on the page. And then my junior year, I did my research paper at Lubbock High on Robert Frost. And I really stuck with the poems that had meter and rhyme and format because I felt like I needed to be analyzing them for my research paper. And my father was really discouraged with me in that. And I remember him picking up a copy of the Frost anthology and flipping the pages to a poem like Out, Out. And he didn't read it to me. He performed it. He stood up and he performed it. And I was so captivated because I didn't even understand that poem because I'd never taken it off the page. I had just looked at it flat. I don't know, what is this? It's about a chainsaw and some kid gets hurt. I mean, it wasn't real to me. And then he flipped the pages and he performed. I remember out loud, holding the book up, he performed Death of a Hired Hand with different voices for the man and the wife in that poem. And it completely changed the way I viewed poetry and oral tradition, and that was a big influence, very, very big influence. My father is a complicated man, but his love of language and his love of livestock and his love of the land, I really think it made me who I am. Gail's always teasing me because he says, "Why do you feel like you have to get on your horse before the boss does?" And I always just think back to, well, that's what Dad would have expected. Don't keep the boss waiting. Get on your horse. Let's go. Be ready to work. So just recently I've written a couple of different tributes kind of to my dad. For my dad, it's not even necessarily the livestock. My dad will just take off walking over the land. I wish I could have shown him some of these. I wish I could show him some of these public lands that I'm on now. For me, it was, I went to college and I was so trapped in the city. I felt very trapped in academia and in the city. And my way out almost was to get married at 19 to a working ranch cowboy. It got me out of the city and out of this very narrow, what I saw as a very narrow box in academia. I wish I had gone on, because I would have found that the longer that you study, the less box there is. But I didn't know that at 19, and I got married so that I could live on one of these ranches, so I could be outside. I didn't ever see being able to actually do the work. I saw being a homemaker and a mother and a cook for the cowboys as a role that I was very happy with for a very long time. I wanted to be outside and be on the land and be with the animals, but not in the same way that the men were. It's only in the last 10 years that I've seen how much I really love doing the work and not just hearing about the work, not just being a support person for the work. That's just something that's come along as a huge blessing in the middle of my life because of where I am now. There's times I wish my father and my grandfather could see what I'm doing. I think they would be proud of me. And then they would also have a lot of instructions for me that I'm sure they could tell me how I'm doing it wrong. But that's the great thing about learning something in the middle of your life is you figure out how you can accomplish it, and it doesn't always look like the way it's always looked. Or I can't out-muscle anything. I have to outthink things. That's the big challenge of being a woman under 5 feet tall doing the work that I'm doing. So.
And with the writing, was obviously you were pursuing that in college and had an interest in it, but was that something too, like did you have a desire that this is what you wanted to do, that you wanted to write and pursue?
If you had, yeah, if you had talked to me when my children were little, when my children were small, I would have told you I am the least ambitious human being on the planet. I loved to write, did not care if I did anything with my writing. I just loved to write. I wrote letters and mailed them to all my friends. I wrote things that never saw the light of day and probably never will. Bought a Dell computer in 1991 because I wanted to homeschool my children. Of course, I could see into that future for my children. I needed the technology, but I had my own files, of course, because of word processing. I was not ambitious. I didn't intend to do anything with my writing. Never wrote a poem. I wasn't interested in that at all. It was only after I realized that some of the things I were writing had form and had maybe had a future that I wrote to John Erickson. Do you know this story of me writing to John Erickson?
I know there's a connection there.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've heard
So my children were listening to Hank the Cowdog ad nauseum, and we had all the Hank the Cowdog books, all the Hank the Cowdog, at that time, cassette tapes, and they were listening to them in the vehicle because we lived way out in the middle of nowhere, so it was really nice to have something for the kids to listen to in the car. And I realized, look at what John Erickson is doing. He's taking a lifestyle that I'm living, and he's bringing it to a bigger audience. And this was in the mid-'90s. I know because Lily was a toddler. And I wrote a letter to John Erickson. I had found his mailing address in Perryton. And I wrote, "Dear Mr. Erickson, today I whacked a bobcat over the head with my broom." And then I went on and just told the story. Because in my mind, in the way I was looking at it, that's what John was doing with his writing. He was just telling story. And even then, without being able to articulate it, that intrigued me. People who were taking the stories from a culture or from a place or from the land, and they were giving it to a bigger, broader audience that didn't have access. So I wrote "Love, Amy" at the end of this story, this letter. And I got an incredible letter back from John Erickson that said, "Dear Amy, I want you to write me 10 more letters, just like that. I want you to start, 'Dear John,' and end 'Love, Amy,' and then we're going to take the 'Dear John' and the 'Love, Amy' off, and you will have complete publishable pieces if you will just tell me a story like that." And bless John's heart, he and Jody Logsden, who was working in his office at the time in Perryton, got several of those pieces published with American Cowboy and Western Horseman and small town newspapers. And they just took me under their wing and made it happen. And I've spent some time with John. And it was a great thing because I got a tiny little bit of the idea of what ambition could look like or what goals for my writing could look like. I was also homeschooling 2 children, and I dropped that type of writing when I realized that it wasn't necessarily sustainable to stay authentic and keep up with that kind of writing at that time in my life. I didn't know how to make it better. I knew how to make it more. And so I put a lot of that on the back burner for a little while because I was full-time mom, full-time homeschooling mother, cooking for cowboys. And the writing happened, but it really kind of went underground for a little while until Andy Wilkinson said, "Hey, I want to read what you're writing now, not just funny stories about cowboys. I want to read what you're writing now. And it had gotten a lot more serious. And Andy did help me make it more about quality and not just quantity. And that's when I began to, not until 2004, 2005, I began to see that my writing could be something that was a little bit more defining for me, not just something Mama did before the kids woke up in the morning. It could be something. And I saw what ambition could look like and what drive could look like. The first time Gail Steiger ever said to somebody else, they were asking about my writing, and he said, "Oh, she's driven." I was so uncomfortable with that. In fact, I told him, "Don't say that anymore. I'm not driven." And then I had to really look, writing does drive me. I am driven. I can't not write. And that's a big evolution for me. And it was just seasons. You have little kids. We have different seasons in our lives. That was just a switch in season for me. The Texas Panhandle is a small place when you start looking at, the cowboy thing and the folk music thing. And so I had been one of the people who got to go hear the Charlie Goodnight thing on stage in Amarillo when...
in Paladro Canyon?
No. Well, I was there too, but when they did the Charlie Goodnight, the one night with Charlie Goodnight, when they did that, Nina Ritchie took the Cowboys. She had us all, from the JA, she had us all go to that. Really? And to the reception. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so that was a long time ago. So I had bumped into Andy several times, but in 2000 and Andy and I talked about this the other day, and we think it was 2003 or 4. Probably 4 is what we're saying. Yeah, I am almost certain it was 2004. My son Oscar performed in Elko, and this was his 3rd or 4th time to perform in Elko, but everybody kept saying, "We want to purchase his album." Well, he was 13 or 14. And I was like, he doesn't have an album. His voice is changing, It was still cracking and on stage. And I just didn't think that was a good project for somebody that age. But everybody kept saying, we want to, purchase his album. And I went home and thought about it for a long time. And then I called Red Stiegel. And I said, what do I do about this? And would you advise? Would you give me some advice? And he said, no, he needs to have an album out. You need to make that happen. And so I had kind of felt like he would advise me to go to Fort Worth to let Rich O'Brien produce it. That's what I thought was going to happen. And Red said, you could do that, but it'll be expensive and you really don't need to. He said, you just need to call Andy Wilkinson. He's right there in Lubbock in the Panhandle, and Andy will do a great job. And he'll be very sensitive to working with a 13 or 14-year-old boy. And it won't cost as much, as far as traveling to Fort Worth. You're right there. So I did. I called Andy, and he said, I'm coming to Canyon, Texas, to the Panhandle Plains Museum. Meet me there. Let's talk the project over. And we did, and we came to some agreements. But also on that day is when he said, I've been talking to John Erickson, and I hear you write. And I would like to see that what you're writing now, not what you wrote in the mid-90s, but what you're writing a decade later. And at that time, I had just gotten my first digital camera. I was walking all over the Llano Estacado. Anytime I didn't have to be in the house, I was walking, and I would come home and write about what I was seeing, and I was taking photographs, and I was creating these emails that I would send out. We had internet for the first time. I was sending out emails to a very long list of people who wanted my writing. It was not blogging. It was this one email a week that I would send out to all these people on my email list. And so I sent him several of those, and he was like, yeah, that's what you show everybody. I would like to see what you don't show anybody. And I finally sent him some pieces, and he told me, stop sending your writing out on email. Just stop, Amy. And sometimes high creatives need a stop. We need somebody to tell us that. Just stop. And then he very beautifully and very gently showed me that what I was doing was crafting essays. He sent me Verlin Klinkenborg, Jeanette Winterson, E.B. White, Meryl Gilfillan. He showed me beautifully. I remember reading some E.B. White and some Verlin Klinkenborg, especially Verlin Klinkenborg's Rule of Life. And I remember calling him and saying, "Oh, this is what I do." And he said, "Yes, this is what you do. Just make a folder on your desktop, write these things. Yes, write them. Put them in the folder. Collect them. And then let's work with them. And let's make them really good. Instead of more, let's make them better." And then there were two instances, one of which was that we lived on the Llano. We had moved up out of the east end of the Palo Duro Canyon. We had moved again, this time to not a sad house, to a nice house. And we were living north of Goodnight, and Andy was doing all these pastel paintings of the prairie. And so he said, "I want to come up for the weekend and do some painting." "Great, I'll take you to some places where you can look off over the Llano, up toward the I-40, wherever the big cross is. I can't remember the name of the town, but he wanted to look over off the prairie. And so he drove up to the house, and he got out of his car, and he opened the hatchback, and he grabbed his easel and all his paints, and he put those under one arm, and he grabbed a bottle of wine, and he put them under the other arm, and he comes barreling up the sidewalk, and he said, "You are not going to believe this. Texas Tech University Press has just hired me to be a series editor. They want me to bring them voices that would not otherwise be heard. You're the first book." And I said, "Me? What book?" And he said, "The book you're writing." It had never, ever crossed my mind that I was writing a book until then. And then there was this moment where I thought, wow, I could collect these things that I'm writing into a book. Wow. And then we commenced to sit down and drink a bottle of wine and talk about it, and it was so much fun, and I was so excited. There was that incident. There was an incident where I traveled with him one time to a creative process workshop he was doing, and we had lunch after the creative process workshop, and he said, "When are you going to quit billing yourself as some little ranch wife and start saying I'm a writer?" And it just made me mad. I just thought, my definition of me is mine. And I went away kind of mad at him. And later I went, wow, he's right. So it's just these one-liners sometimes. And then I got a collection of these essays. And I sent one to him one time that was just one of those vomit on the page, wildly, highly sparky, creative things. It's lots of Amy Weird in it. And I sent it to him, and he said, "Wow, that must be the worst thing you have ever written." I was like, "Oh, thanks a lot." And he was like, "No, you have a lot better writing in you than that." And now I look back, and of course he's right. Or he would say things like, "I really like this, but see this paragraph right here? You can do so much better." And it wasn't devastating, but it was really eye-opening, where I would just go away and I would have to rethink things. He would say, "Why don't you put this one in the drawer for a while and look at it 3 weeks from now and see what you think." Great advice. I do it all the time now. And then we had a collection. I had a collection, and he said, "Now you need to go back over them and really polish them." One of the things he told me during that time is I met him in Canadian, and I got an Airbnb, and he got a hotel room because he was there to perform. And he said, "Let's sit down tonight and let's work on these pieces." And we sat down, and he began to go line by line, by word by word. And I had never seen anybody edit writing asking if every single word, if every single phrase was the best that it could be. I remember what piece we were working on. It's in rightful place. I remember, it's called Connie. I remember word by word, line by line, and we got about 3 paragraphs in with him working with each word, each line, each phrase, each sentence. And he looked at me and "Do you get it now?" And I was so overwhelmed, but I did get it. I said, oh, I can do this. And I realized it was going to be one of my favorite parts of the process, to do this intricate editing that I could just fall in love with. And we put it away. We put it away. We went and ate Mexican food. We drank some more wine. And I knew I could do this part. And it's one of those pivotal moments. Then later in the evening, he said, I don't know, you have to edit this out. I don't know. He looked at me and goes, Amy, you're very talented, but you don't know shit about writing. And I said, okay. I got my notebook out and my pen out. I am perpetually a good student. I said, okay, what books do I read? What courses do I take? What degree program do I pursue? Okay. And he got all shocked looking, and he was like, no, just write. And I've never, ever looked back from that, because those incidences right there at the beginning really spurred me forward. I have a voicemail that's made it through about 3 phones now that I keep. And it's Andy calling me after he read the whole manuscript of Ordinary Skin. And instead of telling me, oh, you can do better than this, or any critique, he told me, okay, you did it. Yeah, this is it.
In a recent interview with Cal Fussman, author and former .com business executive Seth Godin was talking about writer's block and said this: plumbers don't get plumber's block. Writers shouldn't get writer's block.
Well, because of Andy Wilkinson, I have begun to see over the last several years that living is a creative process. Creative process happens for all of us. How you take your coffee, how you decorate your house, how you set your alarm in the morning. It's all creative. We're all creating our lives, whether we're creating a dim and dull life or we're creating a multicolored, sparkly life. Human beings are going to create our lives every day that we walk upon the planet. What our job is as artists is to create a lifestyle and a practice that would support every single drop of creativity we have. We only have so much creative energy in our lives. And we're either going to husband that, and we're either going to get up and do our job. It's almost a spiritual thing that we have a responsibility to God and the gifts He's given us. And however you use God, it doesn't make any difference to me. What matters is that we have been given a gift. Whether you see every second that we're here as a gift, every day that we get to live on this gorgeous, beautiful planet as a gift, but it's a gift. And so we're remiss and we're irresponsible if we don't husband that gift and if we don't take care of it. So developing a practice that supports our creative lives is very important to me. And everybody does it different. For me, Julia Cameron had an influence on me in her book, The Artist's Way, which is also a spiritual book in a lot of ways. So every single morning, whether I'm on the road, I'm at a gathering, whether I'm at cow camp, whether I woke up in a bedroll on the ground, or whether I woke up in a cabin at Willow Springs, it doesn't matter. I write 3 pages of longhand every morning. And sometimes it is just drivel. Sometimes it looks like a grocery list and a laundry list, or I start out, I cannot believe he said that to me before we went to bed last night. It doesn't matter whether it's a complaint, it doesn't matter. What matters, and what you were addressing, is there's no such thing as writer's block. If we pick up the pen and we come to the page, it doesn't matter what we write down. What matters is that we showed up. Because very often, you're not supposed to, according to Julia Cameron, go back and look at your morning pages. And there are times when it would just make me sick at my stomach to look back at my morning pages. They were clearing the stream of debris. They're nothing. But once in a while, And this is what makes it worth it. Once in a while, something happens, and there is a little bit of magic. There's a one line. There's the beginning of a poem. There's the idea for an essay that just happens on the page. And I dog-ear that page, and I come back to it, and I harvest from it. But if I didn't show up, there would be nothing to harvest. If I wasn't faithful to that, there would be nothing there. And I carry my notebook with me everywhere because I just never know when something's going to come down the pipes. And if I ignore it, if I don't grab it, it's like somebody says, oh, here, by the way, I planted something really cool in my garden. Would you like some seeds? And if I don't hold my hand out and take those seeds, then I'm remiss. So I can't remember who said it, but he said there's no such thing as writer's block. You need to be doing something else. Go do something else if you are going to sit and complain about writer's block. Since Ordinary Skin came out, I get 3 to 6 emails a week of people asking me to help with their writing. They don't want help with their writing for the most part. What they want is help publishing. Publishing and writing are completely different animals. It's like a horse and an elephant, a horse and a zebra. I can't help people get published. People who really, really, really want to write will write, and it won't matter if anybody helps them anyway. So once in a while, somebody comes down the pipes who really wants help with their writing, and all then I can point them to is the books that have helped me and the methods that have helped me and the practice that have helped me. But the truth is, living in the arts is, as Mike Beck says, a dangerous game, and writing is an incredibly solitary endeavor. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that my writing takes enormous amounts of solitude and silence. I spend a lot of time with the internet turned off in my office with the door shut, or sitting on a sandbar, having backpacked into the wilderness to just sit there on a sandbar. Nobody wants to hear that. People want to know that it's this beautiful, wonderful dance. And it isn't. It's just a lot of solitude and silence and a lot of showing up at the page. And then, once you have something, my favorite thing in the whole world is to have finished a draft, even though it's a terrible draft, because that's when the fun for me starts. That's when the dance is that you get to spend lots and lots of time with the writing, working with it. I've encountered a writer recently who has written a first draft, and they wanted me to read it, and I'm not going to read it until it's about the 4th or 5th draft, and they didn't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that now they have to go to work. They have vomited it out on the page. They don't want to do anything with it. They want somebody to tell them it's wonderful. Those writers are very few and far between. Once you get it on the page, it's like writing a song or a poem. I think I listen to songwriters sometimes. They've performed a song, for 2 or 3 months before they ever get it where they think it's worthy of being done in public. And so Mike Beck came to our house recently, and we had a meal, and then we made a toddy to sit around the fire, and Mike picked up his guitar, and the whole conversation that night was over the top of Mike's guitar. And I realized, and this is something I tell writers all the time, 98% of the notes that Mike Beck plays are never ever heard by an audience. 2% of the notes Mike Beck plays are heard by an audience. And 2% of our writing is fit to be heard or to be read or submitted or see the light of day. 98% of those are practice. And writers do not want to hear that they need to practice like a musician does. I have a writing practice. And you or any other reader is going to read about 2% of the words that I write, because those are the only ones that are worthy to be seen by the public. I have a writing practice. I have a writing life, and I can't not write.
The following is the first stanza of a poem written by Colorado poet Wes Quinlan. This is from his piece, The Trouble with Dreams. She followed me to ranches that were a long way from anywhere, made sad houses smile when they hadn't in years.
In Elko at the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering this year, I very honored anytime I get to be in the same room with Wes Quinlan, much less be on a session with him. We were on a session together, and he did a poem that he wrote about moving his wife onto different ranches when they were young. And one of the lines said, she made sad houses smile. And it was almost difficult for me to hear that line because I got married when I was 19 years old to a working ranch cowboy. And at that time, I heard several ranch managers say cowboys are a dime a dozen. And they paid them like that too. There was not a value to the working ranch cowboy, and it was somewhat the fault of some of these guys who they just did musical chairs where ranch camps were concerned, especially in my mind, in my memory, especially in Texas, these big outfits, and some of the big outfits in Arizona, they just got mad and quit because there was going to be another camp job down the road, down around the corner. So I moved. My first husband and I moved about every 8 to 24 months from ranch camp to ranch camp. So the ranches didn't do much to keep the houses very nice. I moved into a lot of sad houses and didn't have any choice but to make a home there. So when Vess said the line, she made sad houses smile, it just really struck me. And on the way home from Elko, I don't know about you, but when we were driving, we have a 13-hour drive to and from Elko, and it's different than flying because when we're driving, then boy, my notebook comes out, and I've already taken notes all week, and I start writing. I wrote 3 poems on the way home from Elko this year. 3 poems, not just throwaway poems, but poems I will keep and work with until they're ready to be seen. But when Vess said she made sad houses smile, I thought back to the July that my son was 2 years old. And my husband had quit his job early in the summer, and he'd been day working, and we had been kind of camping out with friends or with my parents. And he found a new job, and it was in the cedar breaks in the east end of the Paladora Canyon. It was a JA ranch lease, and he was going to move us onto that camp. And we loaded everything and all the dogs, and we drove out there into the middle of all that red dirt, and we got to the camp house, and the cowboy who'd been in the house before us had a pig in the house, living in the house. So there were mud marks about knee level on all the walls. There were these mud smears. And so the carpet was this very ancient, nasty, urine-soaked, pig urine-soaked, nasty carpet. And I'm holding a 2-year-old. And I can't even put my 2-year-old down in the house. And there's a horse trailer parked out front full of our belongings. And I can't move my belongings in there. I have to do something. So the boss and Nick went to town and bought me a bunch of $7 a gallon cheap white paint. And we started ripping carpet up. And, only to realize that, of course, the wood floors underneath are also nasty. And it was 105 down there in the cedar breaks, and the cedar flies were biting, and there was no grass in the front yard. It was just dirt, and we couldn't drink the water out of the well because it was gyp water. So we had a cistern, and there's that moment pulling water up out of a cistern hand over hand in a bucket when you realize that the pulley and the rope and the bucket were probably older than I was. And there's a sense of continuity and life goes on, and I'm not the only woman who's ever moved into a horrible, sad house like this. And wintertime came, and I realized that none of the windows fit, and I tore strips of blanket and I insulated all around the sills of all the windows so that we could keep that little kid warm. And it wasn't the only house I moved into like that. Cowboy poetry is extremely socially conscious, and the humor is very self-effacing, and it is an oral tradition. Those same things can be said of the urban slam poets. So when my daughter went off to college, she began to send me YouTubes of some of these slam poets, and I just fell in love. And so I kind of, art is always imitative. So Livestock Man started out as I write with a group of people online where we write 6 sentences at a time. Livestock Man started out where I was discouraged because I was being given the opportunity to get on stage and perform all the time, but writing poetry is just hard for me. I never know when something's going to be a poem or not. So I started off writing Livestock Man because I felt like I had writer's block, which I didn't have writer's block. I just needed to show up at the page. So I started this poem. I have not changed the opening line. I just showed up. Okay, here's what needs to happen. And so this whole thing came out of it, and I made it kind of a slam poem because it's so much fun to play with language in that way. So I need to write a new poem about what it is like as a woman to cowboy for a living. But all I can come up with is how much I hate it when my toes get cold. All I can think about is that last old cow we loaded on the trailer for the sale barn. About the scorpion that ran away when I rolled my bed out on the ground at Alkali Spring in August. About how I alone can catch the roan mare when she won't let the men lay a hand on her. All I can come up with is how much I like cows. And like them, I have ovulated, copulated, gestated a miracle in my body, and lactated for months. I think I am qualified to be a herder of mammals. And that is what I am, a herder, a caretaker, a custodian, a steward. I am a livestock man. I grow food. I need to write a new poem about what it is like as a woman to cowboy. But there are no new poems, and we're never finished shipping cattle in the fall. There may be new foxes in the night and new orioles in the canyon and new griefs to be born and new ways of looking at the world. Oh, please don't let me become blind. And I might become blind if you put me in the cage of your expectations. For I have a rebel heart, and that rebel heart gives me the grit to stay in my saddle after it turns sideways when the bullfight breaks and we're in the way. And that rebel heart says this poem doesn't have to rhyme. I need the language to tell about what it is that I do, but all I have are nouns. Weather and wind and wool, rock, rattle and remuda, smoke and sweat and sunrise and savvy, tracks and trail, tanaha and tally, cow and count and coffee and canyon, logistics and latigos and loops, moon shadow, mud, mother, manure, moisture on the wind, hooves and javelina, and how sharp is your pocket knife. I need the words to tell this story, but all I have are verbs. Pee in the dirt and dally up and build again, and don't cry when you get yelled at. Back off that little heifer and ride up. Don't let that bull bluff you out. We'll never get him again. Thaw the frozen coffee pot. Blink the smoke out of your eyes. Wipe the blood off your chin. Pick the snowballs out of your horse's hooves. Hurry up and get the gate. There's a storm moving in. Open a can of chili. And let's eat before it gets plumb dark. I need to write about working for $75 a day. But all I can think about is that last little cow that we left behind up on the mesa. We'd been gathering into the trap for 4 days, and our first calf heifers run in the general herd, and our bulls are out year-round. She gave birth overnight, but she didn't bring that newborn in to hay, and we had to go. We cut her back with the old hooky cow's daughter and her calf, because the old hooky cow's daughter is meaner than that old hooky cow ever thought about being. And there's not a lion or a coyote who's going to get that baby. But then it snowed. And I don't know what it is that you lie awake and think about at night. Do you ever think of soft, tender hooves and fresh new life up under a cedar tree at 6,000 feet with a mama who's new to this gig? I need to write a new poem about what it is like to cowboy without the requisite body parts. You want to see my tattoos?
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Amy Hale Auker for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Amy at amyhaleauker.com. I'd like to thank Ear Trumpet Labs Microphones for sponsoring today's episode. You can find out more about Ear Trumpet Labs at eartrumpetlabs.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. I recently got in a new batch of Cowboy Crossroads t-shirts, and you can pick up one of those at the website as well. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.